You served as the national security advisor under the first Trump administration and worked closely with President Trump. So we want to know your view on the current India-US situation and the ties between the two countries, especially related to the recent episode uh, vis-a-vis tariffs.
Right. Okay.
Because until recently, sir, we saw the relationship seem stronger than ever, but then came President Trump's remarks and subsequent action, particularly on tariff, that created visible strains. Now, with both sides trying to ease tension and resume trade talks, that has been confirmed by President Trump himself. How do you assess where the relationship really stands, and what is the impact of this current situation that has happened between the two countries?
Well, I think it's important to distinguish between long-term interest between India and Washington and what happens day to day in the Trump administration. Trump doesn't have an overall national security strategy. He's very transactional. He is ad hoc, episodic. He sees things through personal relations. And I think much of the tension between India and the U.S. has been because of Trump's very erratic style. So, for example, although there are a number of concerns on the Indian side, the most recent, the biggest, is the 25% tariff for Indian companies' purchases of Russian oil and gas over the past several years. This is not part of the normal trade conversation, and it's part of Trump's approach to Russia's unprovoked aggression in Ukraine. But precisely that connection shows how erratic Trump can be, because he has not sanctioned or tariffed Russia for violating the sanctions, nor has he sanctioned or tariffed China for violating the sanctions. And China is a much bigger purchaser than India is. And there are many other purchasers, Turkey, Pakistan, and others. So in India, when people say, well, what is the relationship between the U.S. and India, and what does this latest Trump move mean? I would say the relationship's still the same. It's just now we've got to deal with this move by Trump that took everybody by surprise. The issue of how to put pressure on Russia, how to cut Russian revenues that are financing the war in Ukraine, is an important ongoing issue. Why that results in India becoming collateral damage is a different question. So I know this is frustrating in India. If I were in Indian shoes, I'd probably be frustrated too. But I think we have to look at finding ways to resolve it that we all remember will be reflected in the relationship even after Trump leaves office. Yeah. And that will come in less than 3.5 years. I mean, that may seem like a long time. It is a long time, but in the big scope of history, it's not a long time. So that's a long answer to a straightforward question, but I just think, as frustrating as it may be, I think the government of India should look at Trump as a one-time proposition and deal with it and take whatever steps they believe are in India's national interest, but to understand it as peculiar to Trump and not reflecting some larger American view.
During the confirmation hearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, U.S. Ambassador designate Sergio Gor praised the strength of U.S.-India ties, but also stressed that preventing India from buying Russian oil would be the top priority, sir. How do you view his appointment and his remarks? Was there anything in his address that particularly stood out for you and should be watched carefully, sir?
Well, I don't think he's qualified to be U.S. ambassador to India. I think this issue, when we look at the purchases of Russian oil, India and a number of other countries took advantage of an inconsistency in the sanctions themselves. The objective was reduce Russian revenues that could fund the war in Ukraine, but not reduce the Russian sale of oil on global markets in a way that would increase prices to consumers in Europe and the United States. And that obviously creates with a price cap. That obviously creates the possibility of arbitrage to buy from the Russians at the below the cap price and then sell it internationally at market prices. So I think many would argue that there was not even a technical violation of the sanctions, and people can talk about that. But here's what the fundamental objective should be: we don't want to fuel the Russian war machine, and so in that case, what two close friends ought to do is say, look, we would like you to buy oil somewhere else. Now let's find a way to transition away from Russian oil and not just say we're going to hit the entire Indian economy, not just the people who are purchasing the oil, but the entire Indian economy with an across-the-board 25% tariff.
How do you assess Indian leadership approach to this situation? How do you assess India's handling of this situation? Because we have seen that Indian government has largely maintained silence in public, relying instead of back-channel diplomacy to manage the differences. So how do you see this approach?
Well, I think that's the best way to deal with somebody like Trump. If you take the bait and get into a public back and forth with him, it's not going to make things any easier. I think there was a lot of concern in Washington that the two tariff issues combined with Trump taking credit for bringing peace to India and Pakistan after the last terrorist attack in Kashmir was inappropriate. I think India's interest long term lies in reducing ties with Russia militarily and economically, because Russia is increasingly in an axis with China. Putin and Xi Jinping have talked about a partnership without limits. And so even when Prime Minister Modi goes to Beijing and shakes hands with Putin and Xi and Kim Jong-un, that's a signal to Washington. Everybody saw those pictures, but it's not a long-term strategy for India. So it's consistent with what I said before, that Trump's term only lasts 3.5 years. We know it's coming to an end. And so the objective should be continue to try and make progress, minimize the amount of damage that's done, and then work to fix the damage once his term is over. And I think for that, a long-term perspective and a certain willingness to put up with conduct that you don't appreciate very much, but which is unique to one person, not to the entire American people, would be worth keeping in mind.
Do you think the ties will move forward in the positive direction from here, and we will have a deal at the end of the day, free trade agreement when we go forward, sir, from here?
Right. Well, I think where the negotiations are going to start is on the other part of the 50% tariff, the 25% that was imposed unilaterally by Trump. Now, my understanding is that Indian negotiators and U.S. negotiators felt that they had been close to reaching an agreement, and that the Indian side was surprised when Trump just sort of out of nowhere said 25%. And again, I can understand the feeling, but it seems to me that the two sides are not that far apart, that continued negotiations will lead to agreement, and that I hope to try and look for the silver lining in this cloud, that it also then leads to further discussions, not about tariff levels, but about how to eliminate the tariffs and how to open up markets in both countries, because I think closer economic cooperation is in both countries' interest.
Sir, I just want to know, do you agree with the President Trump's approach of pressuring even close partners such as India with such heavy-handed style? Because at one point the relationship seemed to hit a very rough patch with no clear off-ramp in sight, though things have improved. But how do you assess his strategy, and is it worthwhile in the long term, sir?
Well, I wouldn't call it a strategy. I mean, I think he believes, based on his real estate career in Manhattan, that if you take a maximalist position, that you can do that, and it doesn't have any transaction cost. It doesn't affect anybody. And then you can reach a deal and everybody's happy. And I don't think he appreciates, in the international context, that's not the way most people behave. It's okay to take a maximalist position, but he does it more for for the theatrical performance aspect of it, for the domestic political reaction, than because of a strategic approach to relations between India and the United States, or even a strategic approach to a particular negotiation. I don't think it's helpful. I don't think he understands that in this trade war generally that he's started, that the U.S. is losing a lot of belief in our reliability, our good faith, and so on, that we've tried very hard over a large number of years to build up. So he's using up resources, that the political resources that were accumulated over time. That can be fixed, but I think it's a self-inflicted wound. I think it was unnecessary. If we want fewer tariffs, fewer non-tariff barriers between Indian and American trade, let's see if we can't talk about it and reach agreement on it.